At the banquet, Serenity and Elisa run across Mrs. Newman and Cameron in chapter 1337. Serenity automatically extends her hand to assist Cameron, who is blind, and being dragged by Mrs. Newman. Elisa makes a caustic remark about how Mrs. Newman handled Cameron, calling her out for dragging a blind person around. Mrs. Newman tries to keep a smile on her face as she emphasizes that Cameron needs to interact with others and socialize. By sacrificing the child she has raised for so long, Mrs. Newman is implying that it may be time for Cameron to be married and start her own life, which is what the bystanders can infer from her comments. Cameron may have a cool temperament and a beautiful appearance, but blindness and her mother's reputation make it difficult for her to marry into a respectable family. Elisa is interested in old Mrs. York's choice, so she questions how Cameron will end up marrying Callum. But neither Jasmine nor Serenity know the answer. They assume that Mrs. Newman would be unwelcome to have as a relative due to her notoriety and propensity for causing disputes. They inquire into the motivations behind Cameron's union and inquire as to why Mrs. Newman brought her to the supper. Serenity asks about Mrs. Newman's objectives thoroughly in order to prevent spending time on her. She is left alone with Mrs. Newman after Elisa and Jasmine assess the situation and go under the pretext of grabbing some supper. Since Serenity is regarded as a friend, Mrs. Newman proposes finding a seat and having a conversation using Cameron as a justification. Serenity accepts reluctantly and motions for Mrs. Newman to join her. Cameron subtly prods Serenity's palm as they proceed, sending a message. Serenity acknowledges the issue and asks why Mrs. Newman brought her to the feast, whispering to Cameron that she is aware of it.